Hi, this is Dr. Saldivar with another episode of the Way to College podcast. One of the fascinating things about this journey has been the opportunity to connect with folks and the opportunity to expand my network. It has been a joy and a blessing. And today's guest is someone who was not originally part of my network. I met today's guest doing some work with another friend, another guest of the podcast. So we did some work, year-long work last year going into this year. And so I'm excited to hear his story because, whenever we had a chance, we'd talk a little bit and he'd share a little bit about where he was from and the work that he was doing. But I'm eager to really get into his story today. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to allow him to introduce himself. So John, would you mind introducing yourself to our listeners out there?
Yes. Hi. Good morning, Jose. Hello to everyone out there listening. My name is John Olivarez Espinoza. Um, I am a poet and I was born in Indio, California in 1978. I'm 47 years old. And as a as a poet, I think I will begin by reading a poem. Um, I I wrote this poem when I was an undergraduate at UC Riverside. The title is Achy Knees in Palm Springs. One gray Thursday during winter break, Albert and I plucked patches of grass from petunia beds wide as swimming pools within a condo complex. One-story stucco blocks for old men who wipe sweat with dollar bills. We spent our school vacations in shivers, raking, trimming, and mowing frosted yards with Dad. At the 8th hour of kneeling, the weight on my knees was too much for me. For each fistful of grass, I stood up to stretch and let the cold air sneak under my shirt. When Dad noticed the weeds slowly filling the can, he turned to me red-faced and said, "You're packing down the dirt. Kneel on the lawn and weed the beds from there." I said, "I am at least entitled to some circulation." I kept the truth from slipping past my chapped lips, how I didn't care about dirt and weeds from a bourgeoisie's garden. These few men I learned about in sociology class, who raked in more $100 bills than I did citrus leaves in a day. I wanted to tell Dad that these men didn't care if Mexicans spent 10 hours or even a lifetime weeding out the same bed the following week. To only tell him about the hours I felt wasted when we could have rested our sore backs on a bed and drowned in a lake of a much-deserved sleep, or sailed through Tierra del Fuego, us standing on the deck and never bowing, not even to the sun. Or how he could have learned to read, and I would finally show him a poem I wrote. But I didn't, because I knew what he would say. It's the only way to put you through school, this oily sweat. I kept my tongue hidden behind my teeth and watched my brother hunched over, tossing weeds and years inside a green plastic can without a word. So that was titled Achy Knees and Palm Springs, and it is from my collection of poetry titled The Date Fruit Elegies. And so as I was saying, I was born in Indio, California. I'm a poet. I am a former university lecturer. I was also a former retention specialist for a first-year experience program. And currently, I guess I'm a literary consultant or a writing consultant or manuscript consultant. I haven't, literary consultant for geniuses. I haven't, decided on settled on a title yet.
John, one, thank you. So you were I guess technically the first poet that I've had on the podcast,
All
and
right.
definitely the first to open the podcast with a poem. So thank you very much. Um, John, I'm eager to jump into your story. But if you had to identify the starting point for your educational journey, where would that starting point be?
You know, I think there are several starting points. Um, I think it's fun. I think the earliest starting point is when we're in my living room, um, you know, preschool age, and my mom sitting down with me to teach me how to spell my name. You know, I remember that very clearly. I remember the paper and, you know, in front of me, and the pencil, and my mom going over my name. My mom was a teacher's aide for the special education program, or a special education class. She was a teacher's aide. She didn't have she had a high school degree, but she didn't have anything beyond that. I mean, she told me that she had community college experience, but you know, even now, years later, I don't know if I misheard or misunderstood, but I it's something I'd like to verify. I'm not sure if I could verify that. Um, and I think it's because my mom was a teacher. I took learning serious. So when I started when I started school, which, by the way, I grew up in I was born in India, but I actually grew up in Mecca, California, and it was this very small town, Southern California. It's in Southern California, very small town. It's still very rural, and you know, I think it was a town for migrant workers. It was mostly Mexican. It's surrounded by grapevines, so you could imagine, you know. But it's funny, the agricultural stuff. I didn't really feel it that much growing up.
Mhm.
My mom is a former agricultural worker. You know, when she was little. I mean, that's a whole other story. So as well as my dad. But in school, I guess I took learning serious. So I paid attention. I got it right. I got what they were trying to teach me. I learned to read, you know, pretty quickly, and you know, my mom, you know, helped me by, you know, I guess buying me books. You know, she never really said no to me buying books, so I remember I always had books, maybe not a whole lot, but
Mhm.
early on, books were always part of my life. Children's books, comic books, toys, and then sometimes those toys would come with books, like He-Man action figures would come with mini comics, or Transformers would come with a little profile thing on the back, and you know, kind of read that. So I was always surrounded by that. And then I guess when I turned 8, I guess things, you know, changed. You know, things were a little different after that. But
What do you mean? What happened at 8 that things were different?
I guess that so I was 8 in 1986, so I'm growing up in Mecca, California. And I guess a couple of things happened at once that may have influenced one another. Is so my dad is undocumented, was undocumented. So he came across the US without papers. You know, he was 18. And later in my adult life, my mom told me that, you know, my dad would get caught and deported, and then he'd come right back. And this is, you know, while I'm living in Mecca. And when my dad left, like my mom was like, yeah, I never knew if he was gonna come back for many reasons, right? You know, is he
Yeah.
alive? Is he dead? Does he want to come back? And so I don't remember my dad being gone. You know, I have no memory of my dad being gone. And so and but he came back, right? He came back. So my dad my dad is a gardener, and he, you know, the migra would go around the country clubs. He les pescaba, you know, they just pick some gardener, you know, let me see your
Yeah.
paper. And not even that, they'd trick them. You know, they'd be like, you know, where are you from, whatever, and he'd say, oh, I'm from here. And they're like, okay, what's your ID number? You know, they're like, oh, I don't know my ID number. Like, who has an ID number? It was like a trick, right?
Yeah.
um and so 1986 comes around, and you know, Reagan gives amnesty, right? And so my dad finally has stabilization, right? He's going to get a green card. And we luckily we owned a home. We owned a very small home. I mean, it's Mecca, it's not that expensive, but still it was still an achievement to own. So we had a stable living environment. But things started happening at our house. Like my dad would have tools stolen from the backyard. I remember he told me he had chivos in the backyard, goats in the backyard, and then from one day to the next, they were gone. People would steal them. I remember coming home to bullet holes in our bedroom window. And so he was like kind of done with this uptick in crime, and it's in 1986. So I'm figuring too, like, I don't know, I mean, maybe cocaine is like coming into the, flooding into community or drugs.
Yeah.
I might have, had happened. So he decided to move. We decided to move to Indio. It was about a half-hour drive. It was also going to be closer to work because he had to drive about almost an hour each way, when he had to go garden. So we moved to a new school, or we moved to Indio, and we moved in October, which meant that when I went to school, the kids were already a month and a half into school, and my two big classmates, I'm sure already knew each other. So I went in um, a month and a half. I didn't know anybody, you know. I remember walking into the class and being told, they were in groups and being directed to sit in that group and took a seat, and the boy next to me, he was black, and I don't think I had ever met a black person in my life at that point. My uncle Joe, he was dark skinned. I knew black people existed from TV, Mr. T, Benson, if anyone ever remembers that. But I don't think there were any African Americans in our community. And I thought my Uncle Joe was I thought he was African American because he had darker skin. And my
Mhm.
family had to tell me, no, he's not. He's Mexican. And the first thing so I sit down, first thing he tells me is like, hey, do you have any Garbage Pail Kids? And I'm like, no, what's that? And he takes out this stack of Garbage Pail Kids, and the girl in front of me, Michelle, she tells him like, "You're not supposed to have those. There's a band." So it kind of, in Mecca we had a small community, and I think everyone was, pretty well behaved, and I
Yeah.
remember I would always get Student of the Month. I felt like I always got it, and I think it was because I just was quiet. I didn't act up. So when he brought out these cards that were banned, it was kind of the start of like, this is a new game here, it's a new game here. And the kids I made friends with, they were like rough. They would chase girls and call them names and stuff. And so my point is that it was a new environment, and I didn't know anyone, so it was quiet. And then when we had our parent teacher conference, I remember the teacher just like reamed me, like, he doesn't do his work, he doesn't follow directions, uh, like everything the bad kid can do, like essentially not do his work. And I felt so betrayed because that wasn't true. Like, I just didn't know what was going on, and no one caught me up. I had to ask people what
Yeah.
they're doing. And I think that really kind of, killed my confidence, a bit. And I just kind of became your average Joe kid, from there in high school.
Wow. Your so a couple of things. Your story, I think really takes me back, to even, the and reminds me of things that I totally forgot about. And you talk about sort of literacy. And so mom buying you books, right? You talked about that, but also I think the literacy that was found in the toys that we had. And so
Yeah.
I'd forgotten about the little comic books that came with the He-Man and the little profiles. And I played with both, but I was an avid GI Joe collector. And
So
so in
was
the back,
I.
yeah, they had
Yeah.
the little file cards, and I used to cut them
Okay.
out and keep them.
Yeah.
Um, and so I totally forgot about that, and how like reading was so, like, it was a part of the toys even. And then I appreciate you walking us through that transition too into the new community. And I think your story, I'm sure, will resonate with a lot of folks, because for a number of my guests, they talk about like moving schools, and some had immediate success, but then a number of them struggled to kind of find their place. And here you said, right, this was not necessarily, this wasn't who you were as a student, right? But nobody had caught you up. You come in, you're behind it, um, you're trying to find your way. And you described yourself, you became like this average Joe kid, and you said through high school. So this continued all the way until graduation, or was there a moment where somebody saw something in you, where somebody saw that you maybe there you had more to offer, or that there was more to you than just the quote unquote average Joe kid?
Yeah,
What had happened?
growing up in the 80s and 90s in California, you began to see this rise in gang activity. Gangs just became this cool thing to do because, when I was a freshman in high school in 92, 93, like the biggest hit was Ain't Nothing But a G Thing, and I think it made gangs cool. And I lived in a city where there were gangs, right? And there are going to be middle school. Our middle school, Jefferson Middle School, was right across these apartment complex that were a gang. It was Jackson Terrace, right? JT. And so, I think so. You're going to have kids who aren't going to, participate in class, and then you have the super smart kids. And it was like Dr. Nahera that you had on, talked about you were like in honors class and it was like two Mexicans and everyone else was white. So in
Mhm.
high school, you also saw that kind of segregation. And so I was in between. I wasn't a cholo, but I wasn't the smart kid, right? So when I went into high school, we had these three tracks. It was general ed, college prep, and honors. And then the honors was the honors where you're getting an extra point in your GPA. And general ed was for like people who just weren't interested in doing school. And then college prep was, you're in between. Like you might go to college, right? So I
Yeah.
was in college prep. And so when I was a sophomore, I had an English class and or my English teacher, I should say, who looked like Steven Seagal. That's what people would say. He looks like Steven Seagal. And he was just kind of serious. Like I don't know why, but he was very serious, kind of like he had to put up a front because he wasn't going to put up with anyone's, BS kind of thing. And so he assigned one of the books he assigned us was Lord of the Flies. And my brother's 3 years older than me. So when I was a freshman, he was a senior in high school. So he had read Lord of the Flies. So I had some familiarity with what the book was about. I remember watching the 1963 version of Lord of the Flies, with him. So I was familiar with it. So when I got to read, when he assigned Lord of the Flies, I was excited about it because I wanted to read it because my brother read it and I wanted to be like my brother, right? So one weekend, my family and I, or my family went to Las Vegas. We drove to Las Vegas. It's only about a 3.5 hour drive from Indio. And I read Lord of the Flies on the drive over there and on the drive back, over like the week he assigned it, right? So come
Mhm.
Monday, I said, hey, I finished reading the book and he didn't believe me. It's like, it was like, yeah, right. Sure, kid. And yeah, he didn't believe me. So we would take these quizzes and I would like, ace the quizzes because I had read the book. But it took the freaking class like a month and a half to read the book. So by like week 5, like I don't remember the book, I don't remember the details. So I'm doing like worse on the quizzes. So it probably just reinforced the fact that, I hadn't read the book. But what happened then was he assigned a short story assignment. We were supposed to write a short story fiction based on a theme, and the theme was man versus nature. And as a kid, I was always fascinated with the paranormal. So I would always watch these paranormal shows on like Fox and then on the higher upper cable channels that would
Yeah.
have all these weird stuff like can plants have feelings? And then they would have these experiments where like these needles and probes were stuck into house plants. And then you had this like researcher yelling at the plant, like denigrating the plant, like you're not green enough, you're stupid, you're a stupid plant. And like it was like attached to an EKG, and like the needle would start moving as if the plant was like had its feelings hurt.
Yeah.
And then in one of those segments they talked about like cloning and the ethics of cloning. So I ended up writing this short story about clones and about this man who kept a clone in his basement and what he was going to do with the clone. Like he was essentially going to harvest, he was, harvesting organs with his clone, and he was going to take the, get a new heart from it and this and that, So that was the story that I turned in, and like it when my teacher read it, just turned it around. Like it turned it around for him. Like, oh my God, this is like a quote unquote smart kid, or this is not your usual kid. And he just
Yeah.
opened up to me. He's like, well, I'm writing a novel. I write I work on my novel every day after school. I'm like, what? Really? No way. Like that was so impressive to me, He's like, don't tell anybody, but it's about an earthquake, and it splits the earth and ghosts come out of it. I'm like, oh, I'm keeping your secret. It's like it's such a high concept,
Yeah.
thing now. So anyways, the whole point is that after that he viewed me differently, and then he put me in honors. He upgraded me to honors for my junior year. And then with my English teacher, um I guess I was now surrounded by more of a positive learning environment,
Yeah.
more stimulating. But I was now with the white kids. There was a little bit few more Mexicans than Dr. Najera had, but I was one of the few. But I was finally around the white kids and not with the gangsters, kind of distracting me.
Yeah.
And then that English teacher was pretty pivotal because he also taught cinematography, a film class, and that's kind of part of the other journey, is just being introduced to film, not as just entertainment, but there's something more to it, which kind of pushed me in a different direction too.
It's fascinating to me how you talk about these three tracks, right? And the general ed track and kids that aren't doing school. And I think your story kind of just reminds us, right, that the kids that aren't doing school aren't exposed to a lot of the opportunities that the kids in the honors and maybe even college prep, right? And so here you are, a teacher recognizes your gifts, and all of a sudden, okay, I'm going to upgrade you into the honors. And now you get exposed to the cinematography, right, and the film classes and whatever. But these kids, that aren't, right, maybe they would if they had opportunities to take a
Yeah.
cinematography class or a film class. So thank you, thank you for sharing that. You're taking us, you're going through this educational journey. Now you're having more opportunities, John, than you previously had. Was junior year, senior year, a lot of students begin to think about college. And there's messaging either from the school or from the teachers, messaging from home. Was going to college part of that message? Was that something that you aspired to do? And where was that message coming from?
My parents expected me to go to college. And I got that mess, even though they didn't have college degrees. So my dad, as I mentioned, he had come over undocumented. He got a green card in 1986. And he had a third grade education, and no higher. And he was born in Guanajuato, Mexico, and he grew up on a ranch. So like education was a privilege for him. Like he had to stop at third grade. Like the school was too far for him to go, and they needed him at the ranch. And so when he was 18, he left, his family to go work here, send money, support. But it's so sad because, one of your uh prior guests talked about his brother. I think you asked him, like, why did he go to school and your brother didn't? And he said it was luck. And it's true. My dad was born unlucky because he was born on ranch and poverty. But my dad is an autodidact. He is a self-learner, and he's always wanted to learn, and he's always wanted the opportunity to learn and to be educated. And that's what he wanted us to have, like so many Mexican American stories. So he always pushed that, you're going to go to college. And I'm going to flash forward here, but very similar to you, when I was 14, my dad took me to work. He took me to work with him and my little brother. And my older brother was already working with my dad when he started when he was 8. So he took us there because, several reasons, but he's like, I want you to know what work is so you don't have to do what I do. I want you to want more than this. And he also wanted to keep us out of trouble, you know.
Mm.
So I got the messaging from my dad, and I got it from my mom. My mom, I think would have been college bound, and she loved learning, but she didn't have the opportunity to because she was a migrant worker. Her family, my grandfather came through with the Bracero program. And so they worked the fields when they were little, and he wanted everyone. And he did not want my mom and my aunts and uncles to get an education. He didn't want them to go to school. He wanted them to drop out of school as early as possible to work. And my grandfather would kick out my mom out of the house and say, "You're not coming back till you go find work." And then she'd come back eventually. I don't know, I'm not sure if she found quote unquote work or not, but she'd come back and she'd find her textbooks were torn up by my grandfather, you know. When my mom and my uncle, Joe, when they graduated high school, they might have graduated at the same time because my uncle Joe may have, I don't know, something happened. Or maybe my mom started very late, or was put in school very late when she immigrated. So they were like the same grade. But when they graduated at the same time, they had to beg my grandparents for a ride to the high school for graduation. And they reluctantly gave my aunt and my mom and my uncle a ride to graduation. And then when they got there, guess
Wow.
what? They stayed in the truck. They stayed in the car while my mom and my uncle graduated. So
Wow.
my parents valued education. They wanted that for us. So there was like sort of no doubt that I was going to go to college. It's just that how was it going to happen? To me, it was just going to sort of kind of I just assumed somebody was going to help me do it. My older brother, he went to college. He went to UC Irvine, so there was this precedent, but a lot of it was luck because essentially what got me into college was not just my parents' messaging, but also the early outreach programs that they had there, which was kind of weird and funny because they still treated me like a average Joe kid in a way.
No. You're so these early outreach programs, you have those available to you, right? And you're expected to go to college. Your parents want you to go to college. What were you looking at? What were you looking at in terms of different universities, schools?
I had zero research. I had like very little idea. So my brother went to UC Irvine, and so I wanted to go to UC Irvine also. So that was kind of my goal. Like I just want to go to Irvine. But I was in the early academic outreach program. Like somebody, recommended me. They put me in. Like I didn't, you want to be in this? And I agree. Like I didn't look out for it. They sought me, thank God.
Yeah.
And they did some check-ins, but it was weird because they didn't, it wasn't like they were like guiding me, holding my hand. But one of the things they did was that, and why I still participated, is that we would take trips to UC Riverside, which was only about an
Mm,
hour away.
mhm.
And we would take these field trips, and I'm like, that's cool to me, miss a day of school, go field trips, hang out. And so I went to UC Riverside on field trips, I think every year for 4 years. But I didn't want to go to Riverside. I wanted to go to Irvine with my brother. The only difference was that when we dropped off my brother for move-in day, like Irvine was just so busy. There was a lot of activity. Like it was a whole different environment, and it looked like a labyrinth to me. Riverside was much quieter. There weren't a lot of people at the time. There weren't a lot of people on campus, and it just was just this campus with little green, not necessarily hills, but just green areas and arches and buildings. And didn't feel as scary. But I wanted to go to UC Irvine, and so what happened was that my principal at the time set up a deal that said set up a deal with UC Riverside that said any student who graduates from Indio High School with UC requirements, right? You had these minimal requirements, like you had to take in at least geometry, you had to take in at least chemistry. There were, yeah, the UC requirements. Anyone who graduates here with the UC requirements will automatically get into UC Riverside, like bar none, no questions asked. And so I knew, again, the messaging got to me that there were these UC requirements. And again, I was pretty decent in school, right? I was a B student. I was good at math, decent math until I got to pre-calculus and I hit a wall. I couldn't think that abstractly. And so I I applied to college, and I don't even know how I did that. I don't know if I walked into the counselor's office and I said, can I get a UC application, please? Like you would get a job application. They just handed it to me. And I remember like filling it out in my room after school, like on my bed with pen and paper, like no help at all. I was just answering the questions. And one of the things that I wish I could go back, if I can go back and tell myself, is the essay. Because I don't know how I got this messaging. Again, it has to be luck. But somebody's told me that you get good grades, try to get a B average, and then you have to do volunteer work for your junior year. And that way you can write down your application. So I did I was part of the Explorer program. I don't know if you know what that is. It's sort of like this volunteer program for high school students who are interested in law enforcement. So I
I've
did
heard of it, yeah.
I did the Explorer program. And so when I sat down to do the essays, my essay was simply like a verbal resume, I want to go here. I volunteered as an explorer. Let me in, you know. And obviously that's the way to do it. I asked teachers for letters of recommendation. I don't even know how I got those. Like I asked, they're like, yeah, I'll do it. I don't even remember getting them. I don't know if they sent them or not. Um, and then I got a call one day, and I answered the phone, right? And they're like, can I speak to John Espinoza? I'm like, oh, this is me, right? It's coincidence speaking. They're like, oh, hi, John. We want to know if you want to go to the UC, if you want to participate in the UC Irvine summer, camp, transition camp, we want you to do this, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wait, why are you asking me this? And they're like, oh, no one told you you got into Irvine. I'm like, I did? Like, yeah. I'm like, oh, okay, great. I'm like, yeah, I'm interested. I'll just have to ask my parents, blah, blah, blah. And I hung up the phone, right? We finished, hung up the phone, and I told my parents that was Irvine. They were calling about a camp thing. They said I got in. They're like, oh, great, congratulations. 2 weeks later, I get a rejection letter from Irvine. Yeah, I don't know what
Wow.
happened. Someone dropped the ball. Yeah, they told me, I got a call to participate in this like, transitional program, and then I get this rejection letter. I only applied to two UCs because why bother? I wasn't smart enough to do UCLA. I didn't think, I don't think I wanted to go to UCLA anyway. I wasn't prepared for that. I only applied
Yeah.
to two colleges, Irvine and Riverside, only because I'd gone to Riverside. And thank God that the principal set up this deal, because I don't know what would have happened to me.
Wow. So you go to Riverside. What was that transition like then? Here you are, given all of your experiences in high school. What was the transition to college like for you?
I The good thing about Riverside, like I said, I had visited it, so I had this familiarity. They When I told them I was going, they set me up with this orientation. I'm sure all the colleges have it. They call it Fairfax orientation. You spend a weekend in the dorms, you do tours, and one of the pivotal things they do is they actually sign you up for classes in the fall. Like one of the undergrads there like sits down with you and asks your interests and signs you up, and and they were gonna go easy on me, like I didn't pass. During that weekend you take your writing test and your math test, and I like did not place. I did not get into that English 1A standard. I got into the remedial. There were two remedial classes, 5A and 5B, and I got to the highest one of the remedial, 5B. And then like the math, I was good at math, but I hadn't taken math in like 2 or 3 years. So I got like the lowest of low. They're like, you got to go back to the basics and just study on your own. Like it was called individual math. It was like a self-paced thing. And yeah, so I was shocked that I didn't pass the writing test. And so they gave me like three classes, and one was writing, one was film, introduction to film, and the other one I might have been psychology. And it whooped my butt. I was not prepared like I thought I was going to be. Um, I scathed by, I mean, I think I might have gone a low B in the English course. And look at me now, writing consultant, you know. Film, I got like a B, but film helped me so much with writing. Um, it was a rough transition, and I was also kind of at a strict family, so I wanted to go out and have fun. Like I didn't prioritize studying as much as I should have. You know,
Yeah.
I knew I couldn't drop out. I knew I couldn't fail because bad things would have happened. You know, I would have had gone home. You know, gotten a yelling, maybe a whooping from my dad. So I knew I had to survive somehow. The early academic outreach continued my freshman year, so I had to check in with an undergrad who worked for them, and she just said, "How are you doing?" "Fine. Everything okay? Great. All right, you may leave." And that was it. But just having that minor accountability really helped, though. Like those
Yeah.
programs, I think really work. You know, work for me.
Typically, first year of college, um, a lot of students have an idea of the things that they want to study and what they'd like to major in, potential careers they'd like to pursue. What was your major and what is it that you at that time that were you thinking about doing?
Yeah, so I always hopped around with career options, and I came in undeclared. So, you know, when someone asked me what my major was and I didn't want to get into it, I'd say, well, I'm undeclared. But when I came into Riverside, I wanted to be a film director. So that's what I told people, and that's what people knew me as my close friends, especially my residence hall. They knew me as the guy who wanted to make movies. Like I wanted to be a movie director. But there was no film program at UC Riverside. There was some, you know, art production. It was called video art. That was one of the first classes I took was video art. You know, you shoot on like Super 8. And then there were the film theory classes, you know. And so I always was kind of on the creative side. I wanted to do something creative. I wanted to be a comic book artist in my junior year. I also wanted to be a detective and an FBI agent. That's why I was in the Explorer program. I remember being 17 and calling the Palm Springs FBI office and asking for an application. And they sent me an application, but I knew that was not going to be for me because I didn't meet the height requirements or even the vision requirements and all this. Years later, one of my friends now, her husband's a former FBI agent. They're like, they would have taken you in at 18. You could have done office work, man. You could have worked for the FBI. I'm like, I don't know. You know, my senior year, I fell in love with movies and I was watching, you know, I was almost done graduating, you know, everything was kind of coming easy to me. So I had a lot of time. So I was watching a lot of movies and watching movies on a serious way. So I wanted to be a filmmaker, but I didn't know how that was going to happen. I was going to make it happen. I didn't know how because there was no major. And then somebody gave me the idea that if you want to make movies, you got to learn how to make money and raise money. So be a business major, you know? So I think I declared business for like 2 weeks. And I said, no way. And you know why? Because of the math.
Yeah.
Because I hadn't passed the math. And one of the reasons that attracted me to UC Riverside was that how I was kind of talked into it a bit with the college counselors in high school was that it had a creative writing major, and it was the only UC with the creative writing major. So to me, the backup, my fallback was creative writing because at least I could tell stories. And creative writing didn't require you to take math. All it did was require you to take one computer science course, and that fulfilled your math requirements. So in a way, I had to take it. And so I got out of business. I think I might have declared business, and then I just declared creative writing. And I just said, I'll figure it out somehow, you know, how to be a filmmaker somehow.
The wow. The so you graduate with a degree in creative writing, correct?
Yeah. And sociology, I double majored
Okay, creative
because
writing
I
and so
fell in love with sociology and all and you know inequality and whatnot. So I was taking sorry, I was taking summer school every
uh-huh.
summer there because if I didn't take summer school, I had to go work with my dad. So it was my way of avoiding work. And it was also my way to make up classes that I didn't pass. You know, I think, you know, I had to do a pass, no pass on a few science classes. And I got a C minus and C minus no pass. So I had to make it up somehow. But I ended up, yeah, just doing a double major. So creative writing and sociology.
for a lot of kids, actually. Some of my guests have spoken recently about after college and sort of the rude awakening that they experienced after college, because they I think a lot of students felt like, well, I'm going to graduate and I'm supposed to have a job, or at least a job. It's going to be easy to find a job. Post graduation, what was that like for you? Did you find work immediately?
I went to grad school. I went to grad school immediately. That was
What
another
and
life.
what and why did you do that?
Because what else was I going to do? I was coming up to graduating. I declared creative writing. I got most of my core classes done, so I just had to do creative writing and sociology classes. So my junior year, I was starting to take the required courses for creative writing, and I took a poetry class. I wanted to be a fiction writer because I thought, okay, if I can be a fiction writer, maybe I can get into UCLA or USC screenwriting program. I didn't know how I was going to do that, but I figured that they were comparable. So I wanted to be a fiction writer, but the requirement was you had to take at least one class from the other genre. In this case, it was poetry. So I'm like, let me get this out of the way. I'd written poetry, but I didn't take it serious. And I took a poetry class. Again, I paid attention to teacher what he was trying to teach us. And I did all right enough for for me to catch his attention. His name is Christopher Buckley. He was a poet. And thank God I had him for a teacher because he knew what he was doing. He knew how to teach. He was the real deal. So he noticed that, this Chicano guy kind of writing about some stuff like this poem I read, I wrote in his class. And he kind of like it's semester or quarter ended, and I went to see him about something about my portfolio, and he's like, "You're taking my advanced class next quarter, right?" And I couldn't say no to authority figures. So I said, "Yeah, I will." Wasn't planning to, but I said I would, and now I had to stick to my word. So I took him for poetry at advance. I got, raked over the coals for my poetry. And then he taught other classes like creative nonfiction. So I took that. So he became familiar with me. He was the mentor, that you talk about your other guests, you got to find a mentor.
Yeah.
I found mine through my major, and I caught his attention. From there, he guided me to he's the one who encouraged me to that grad school in creative writing was an option. I was hesitant because I wanted to go to film school, but he knew his stuff. And then I looked at the reality, like film school's not that's not going to happen. I have a better chance. Under his guidance, I applied for grad school. He told me what to write. He told me where to apply. He told me that I can get it paid for. He told me that if I got into one more school, I can start a bidding war with financial aid. He knew it all, and he guided me. I got a big grant before I graduated, a big writing grant. I was published. Gary Soto, the famous Chicano poet,
Mhm.
published my senior thesis under the Chicano chapbook series. It was all luck, mostly just luck that it happened that way.
Luck in the sense that you took this teacher and he recognized potential in you and mentored you and guided you. It wasn't necessarily strategy on your part, right? It wasn't
No,
like I need to get that class. I love that. And let me ask you, because some of my guests have also talked about the idea of work, and you and I talked about this before jumping on the call, right? And how our parents, I had one guest, actually several, that talked about they grew up as migrant farm workers, working outside, working with their hands, and how their parents, their aspirations were always that the kids would work inside in air conditioning,
yeah.
right? And so here you are, you're majoring in creative writing, you're going to grad school. Did your parents ever ask you, and so what are you going to do for work? What kind of work are you going to do? Did you all have those conversations?
We had that conversation, and I remember having that conversation, and I was, you know, I don't know, kind of embarrassed, you know. I cannot remember if when I had the conversation with my parents, if it was me telling them I'm going to apply to graduate school or I had already gone in. but I told him that I was gonna go to graduate school or apply to graduate school in creative writing. And I was kind of embarrassed about that, because I think like a lot of Mexican Americans, their parents, you know, were like, why don't you be a lawyer or a doctor? Because those are the most easiest, successful locations that you can identify, right? There's never anything between. There's never like,
Yeah.
why don't you become a film archivist at UCLA or at the American Film Institute? That'd be a great job for you. You like movies, right? It's
Yeah.
like you're either a doctor and lawyer. And because I was coming to them now, I remember one time, I think I might have told my dad, I'm thinking of majoring in business, and he was so excited. And then that didn't happen. So I felt like I was going to disappoint them by
Yeah.
saying I'm going to go study in grad school. And I remember, I remember telling them either they will pay for it all and you don't have to pay for anything. And I don't, and again, I remember if I had gone in and told them that I got a full scholarship that first year, but I was embarrassed, and it was the exact opposite. They were so happy. They're so proud, because I guess I was ashamed that I wasn't telling them I was going to med school, right?
Yeah.
Or law school. But they were just so happy and so proud that I was able to get in graduate school and then have it all paid for, you know. The other
Yeah.
the other 2 years was up in the air, but at least the first year was paid for.
What came after grad school, John?
Yeah, that was a tough one. I call it post MFA. I got so in grad school I got a Master's of Fine Arts in creative writing, poetry. I did it's a 3-year program. I did 4 years because I was on the fellowship, and the fellowship paid for 2 years, and I got it like my second year, and I said I'll stay here an extra year to take advantage of the money and the courses. Um, man, I think that the year after graduate school was just a lot of I don't know if floundering is the right word, but I went to school at Arizona State University in Tempe. I was always among hot weather. I wanted to go somewhere cooler, so I moved to Northern California. I moved to Sunnyvale, right next to San Jose. And at the time, I wanted to apply, or I had planned to apply to the Stanford University's Wallace Stegner Creative Writing Fellowship. It was a 2-year program, non-degree conferring program, but you got to study with, great poets, and it was all paid for. Tuition was paid for to give you a stipend. I'm like, this is perfect. And maybe the closer I am to Stanford, the more likely I am to get it. And so I had applied, now that I think about it, I had applied to a few postgraduate fellowships, and I didn't get anything. So I was in San Jose,
Hmm.
very expensive place with a
Yeah.
creative writing degree. And it was very tough to find a job. No one was hiring. I think that kind of had a psychological effect on me and what a MFA meant, because no one was hiring. And they weren't going to hire you with a MFA degree. But I got a job. I got an office job because I thought an office job would help me become a writer, right? Just go to work in the day and then write at night. It didn't happen that way. But I ended up going back and teaching at the National Hispanic University. So I was teaching, writing composition courses with mostly Latino students, which was a whole other thing. That was my introduction of, dreamers, secret society of dreamers.
John, I want to be mindful of our time. We're
Oh
about
yeah.
an hour, we're about an hour in. And I'm gonna ask if you'd be up for doing a part two. Because I feel like
Yeah.
we're just getting into um because I'm running up on time here for me too, and
Yeah.
so and we're just getting into your career, and I want to hear about the Secret Society of Dreamers, and I want to hear about everything to kind of to this point, and particularly about finding your way professionally, um because it like I think so many of my guests, it's kind of this circuitous route, right? It's not never
Yeah.
a straight line, and so I really want to tease that out. So, can I have you? Can we set up a second part?
Yeah, yeah, we can. We can.
Okay,
I'd
and
love to. I'm like, I must have been yapping away because I felt like we just started. Like
it
you're
it
saying, right? We're getting warmed up.
Yeah, and so we're just getting into it. But what I'll do is, and depending on the length of the second part, I may decide to post it in two parts. So
Yeah.
kind of like a part one, part two. So here's what we'll do, John. We'll go ahead and close here, and we'll, for our guests, I'll invite my guests to come back and check out the second part. John, thank you. Thank you for walking us through and sharing, and thank you for the poem. It was beautiful. And yeah, thank you for your time
You're
today.
welcome, and thank you for inviting me. I guess I yapped off. There's so much more.
No,
So,
yeah, no,
so
I know, I could feel it coming, but I was
but
like, oh man, I want to make sure we give it sort of the time that it
yeah.
deserves. So, so what we'll do is we'll end there. So for our listeners out there, thank you again for tuning in. Thank you to my guest. Make sure you subscribe, rate, follow, all of that good stuff, and we'll see you again soon on the Way to College podcast. Bye-bye.